We forgot?
Yeah.
Oh dear. We forgot to switch it on.
But now it's switched on. So here are...
We have been doing the definition of discrimination.
For the... So here I wanted to highlight two cases in the Inter-American system, both against Venezuela. These cases were not primarily about violence against women, but there's an element here that's interesting and for you to I guess ponder. In both these cases, basically media organizations that were in opposition to the government, Global Visión and RCTV, these two organizations had reporters that would go out and report on different activities of the government or manifestations, things like that. But the thing is that when they would go out and do their reporting, they would often be harassed by private individuals. There was never any proof shown that state agents were involved in this harassment. So yeah, they would go out and they sometimes would get physically manhandled, things like that. They would get yelled at, things like, basically things to try to prevent them from doing their reporting. So these cases were actually about freedom of expression. And government agents, it wasn't shown that they were actually involved in this, but they would signal these people as enemies of the state or people that were basically persona non grata in Venezuela. The court found in these cases that Venezuela had not guaranteed the right to freedom of expression because Venezuela did not act to ensure that they could make their voices heard in opposition to the government. Now, what does this have to do with discrimination? Well, the petitioners in both these cases said, of these reporters, the great majority were women. So this is a case of violence against women and discrimination. Now, the court decided whether or not this was in fact the case, but what do you guys think? Do you think that this would count as discrimination, considering that the great majority of the reporters who were harassed were women? Does that seem to be discrimination to you?
The problem is that in Venezuela it's not only for women that the right of expression is forbidden, it's for everyone.
No, but it's not the freedom of expression point. That was decided against the state. But it's the fact of violence against them as women. That's what we're asking. Do you think that this is an example of a case in which there was violence against women? They were attacked physically sometimes, and sometimes verbally abused, and so on.
No, but I'm sorry. Maybe I misspoke. It was discrimination. Whether this was a case of discrimination against
discrimination
women.
Against
and you said that not only the men but also the women were attacked, right?
Not only the woman, the men too. Everyone is attacking Venezuela.
So go on.
But I don't know, because it's like Chavez was the president of the ignorance after resentment. So the slogan, I don't know. Now they're calling gay the other candidates. So they use always the machismo to abuse others. Not only women, men too.
That's part of the answer, yes.
It's part, but
I don't think it's mutually exclusive, and I don't think we need to say that it was either violence against women or violence against men.
Or discrimination
or
against
discrimination in the form of violence against women. From what I've heard, to me it sounds like violence against women as well as violence against men. And I think just to reiterate kind of the question Samantha had, is what kind of violence? I think that violence is very multidimensional. It's not just physical. It can be emotional, mental, intellectual, structural, communal. So I think that's a really important point.
I mean, I definitely hear there was violence both against women and against men.
Yeah.
Was it discrimination?
Was it discrimination against women? Because most of them were women.
Well, disproportionately, yes.
I was going to say, too, because women were disproportionately targeted, it means they were targeted on the basis of their sex, gender, so it was discrimination unique to gender.
But were they disproportionately targeted if there were more women journalists there? Happened to be more women journalists there. I'm sorry, we're trying to force you to I noticed practitioner lawyer not opening his mouth.
I think that was where my next question was going to be, was whether or not, to begin with, the greater majority of reporters were women.
Yes.
Because then it would, in my mind, seem to be motive to discriminate against women per se, as opposed, I mean, if there's just more women in general, it would be a factor, but if they were targeted more so than men and there was an equal number or fewer women, to me it would stand more as a case of discrimination.
Exactly. You just applied.
It's almost the same quantity of men than women. I'm reading the case.
No, there was more women than men. It was.
What I'm reading. Armando, Miguel, Antonio, David.
No, you're but remember the names of the persons don't necessarily indicate the whole number. Those are the petitioners' names.
The petitioners said there were more women than men.
Actually, that was
their argument.
The factor thing, but yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Your answer was correct because you were actually applying the definition. In this case, the motive behind the violence and the harassment against these people was to curtail their freedom of expression. And there were more women petitioners than male petitioners, according to the terms of what the representatives had alleged. But they weren't being targeted because they were women. They were being targeted because they were opposition journalists.
Yeah.
They weren't being affected disproportionately because there were more women than men. So clearly, if all of them were being targeted,
it happened that there were more women present than men.
I think when we look at the fact that gender connotes masculinity or femininity, you could also look at it from the aspect of people in power that have the wherewithal, trying to oppress those that are not in power, be it women or men. So it's not always we should look at gender-based violence as violence against women. We should look at it as power, the powerful oppressing,
or discrimination against women. You have to identify. You have to really identify the issue. Were they discriminated against because they were women, or because they were journalists, or because they were doctors? That kind of definition.
But remember that a disproportionate impact also counts as discrimination.
Precisely.
You may have de facto discrimination,
but the impact.
Yeah. And there's a couple cases that illustrate that we'll mention. Yes.
There is a difference between sex and gender.
Precisely.
You need to specify that first and then apply the cases. People say, if it is gender, it's only women.
No.
Then there is no word to say about that. That's why we need to, when we discuss about gender issues, first we need to clarify what is gender.
To bear it in mind.
Exactly.
The meaning of
gender.
gender.
Then start arguing to that. It's basically like a decision.
Yes.
I don't think in this case it's discrimination. Like it depends from an issue to another. Sometimes they can play the card of men, and sometimes the women, but to impose certain idea or something, it's not kind of discrimination. They know how to manipulate the public order with stressing it on women or not for something else, but maybe because of the number of women there or something. But it's not important that it's discrimination against women, and it happened because they were women. In different situations, could be it happened because they are men. It's not because they are women or men, but because of political agenda.
Because they were journalists. That's the point.
I will say something that as of Venezuela. In Venezuela, you can see more women on TV, and that is going to sound ridiculous, but it's true. Because they are more beautiful than men.
More women where?
On TV.
On TV. Yes. So I don't think no, it's true. So they are more beautiful than men. They are more beautiful than men. So they took beautiful moments and they put it on the TV. So you have to take the reality of the country too. It's true. So I really believe that in Venezuela, that case is about politics. It's about the
Freedom of expression, basically. They want to.
freedom of expression.
Beauty is in the eyes of the people.
I think everybody starts
Discrimination against men. That's like that. You see your own perception. The eyes of the beholder.
It's not my own perception. If you open the Venezuelan TV, you will see woman.
Well, the thing is, if that were the case, the representatives would have to prove that before the court, and they didn't. So,
I don't know, because everyone is targeted. Everyone. It's
But-
not only because we're a woman.
that's precisely why it was ruled here that it wasn't discrimination.
But
That it was not proved that it was discrimination.
there may be discrimination in the labor practices of the media, because if a man applies for a job to be on TV and they say, no, we're not applying, we would prefer to have a woman. Well, you wanted to say something?
Well, I mean, I understand that it's not disproportionate because we have more women in that particular protest, but wouldn't the inquiry be more about looking at other protests and how the police reaction was to other protests where there weren't as many women? I mean, would that be a more complete?
Had the representatives brought that to the court, then
Remember, the court has to deal with the specific facts before it, and the specific facts relating to those petitioners, and apply their interpretation of the convention, the article in the convention, which is they say was violated, and see whether it was violated. And then we may look at other case law of the court itself, and of other courts, and of the Human Rights Council now, committee, and various CEDAW, and so on. We really look around to see what support we can get in our decisions. But we would not necessarily look at facts of other instances to help us decide the facts.
But to decide discriminatory practices against
Oh yeah, if for instance we have,
case.
yes, like we would when we deal with the case, the cotton field case in Mexico, the court did look at that, and that was specific. In certain instances, even in Venezuelan cases, that we had lots of freedom of expression cases coming up to the court, and there was an international court is a peculiar creature. Because a judge sitting in a national court deals with the case, decides the case, and to hell with the hindmost. So sometimes an international court thinks of the effect their decision may have on the region and on the state itself, vis-a-vis its relationship to the court, which sometimes makes me feel very uncomfortable. Used to make me feel very uncomfortable. But there you go. Venezuela we had a particular thing about freedom of expression. Always, we had so many cases on freedom of expression.
But I think that's the main issue here, not one. It's freedom of expression.
Yeah, these were freedom of expression.
And that journalist, Susana Rios, was really famous in Venezuela. But the problem is that they use the gender speech, okay, sexist speech, not only to inflict women, but also men.
Yeah, what is
If
gender?
you're a woman, there's laws. But if you are a man from the opposition, you are homosexual. So they use the card of, it's the same thing, it's homophobia, machismo, it's all the same. And they use that to target the opposition. It's not only true women. I know women are always more targeted, but we had a very famous case also from a journalist. He was a friend of Susana Rios, by the way. And when he was killed because someone wanted to steal his car in a club. And then what did the national TV, the Chavista TV, they put on TV, on national TV, oh, he died, he was gay, and they put pictures of him and his partner and everything to say they use the gender speech.
Yeah, the examples weren't to say that that's not the case. I'm sure it is. But the thing is, that's something we could learn in terms of litigation. I mean, if you think that there's a structural practice of discrimination by state authorities, you have to prove it.
Yeah.
The argument here was simply more women than men were harassed in this particular case, therefore there was discrimination. And unfortunately, that does not fit into the definition of discrimination, because you need an impact on women because they are women,
Yeah.
or that affects them disproportionately.
Yeah.
And they didn't show that in this case. So the court
Although
couldn't say that there was discrimination. Maybe there was, but you have to bring the facts to the court. And that's what, just let me finish up. In this cotton field case that you also had an excerpt of last night, in this case, well, I mean, if in case you guys, I hope you all read it, but in case you didn't, in this case, 3 young girls, all of them from poor sectors of society, 2 of them underage, 1 young but over the age of majority. They lived in Ciudad Juarez.
The one was a minor.
2, right?
No,
Well,
2 were above the age
well,
of
they were-
majority,
they were-
1 a minor.
But all 3 of them were young, poor women. And in Ciudad Juarez, at the time and still, unfortunately, today, there's femicide. So the women die by the hundreds.
Hundreds.
And they're basically killed off. And unfortunately, this has its roots in very, very strong discriminatory attitudes toward women, which we call machismo in Spanish. Part of it is socioeconomic, because when the maquilas came to Ciudad Juarez, they started hiring
You
women.
don't know what maquilas is.
Oh, maquilas are sweatshops, I'm sorry.
Sweatshops.
When the sweatshops came to Ciudad Juarez, they started hiring women because women were cheaper labor. So right there you have
And
discrimination.
men were unemployed. Lots of them.
And yes, so we have lots of men unemployed in a city where the traditional beliefs were that women should stay in the home, women belonged in the home, they did not belong in the public sphere. The men should be the ones to be the breadwinners, should be the ones out making money. So there was a lot of social tension, and men started taking out that aggression on women and basically killing women. Women were, any woman that was seen in the public sphere was a target.
Work and all
So
that,
they would go to work, go to school, they were targeted. This was compounded by their poverty in many cases. So we have here cases of intersectionality, which is double discrimination or triple discrimination depending on social status. Basically, if you were a poor woman, authorities, when they received claims that you had been mistreated or that you had disappeared, would ignore those claims. They would tell.
More than ignore.
Well, they would tell the family, "Oh, good girls stay at home. She's probably just off with her boyfriend, or she's off
You know
whoring
what
around,
these girls are like.
or
you know.
she's off prostituting herself." Things like that were the responses that the authorities would give the family members. And there was an unofficial policy that when a woman would disappear, they would wait 72 hours before starting to go out looking for her, because they would tell the family, she'll come back soon, she's probably just off being a slut. So when these 3 families came, these are the responses that they got. And 72 hours later, authorities started looking for the women.
Not much.
They started looking, but they actually,
Half-heartedly.
yes, basically a very,
The
very
families did more.
light
Yeah.
investigation. And then several months later, these women were found in a cotton field, and that's why it's called the cotton field case. It's actually Gonzalez and others against Mexico.
With some other bodies.
Yes, with about 8 other bodies. And these bodies were found in conditions that it was very clear that these women had been subjected to severe beatings, possibly torture, and sexual abuse, because they were found half naked, with their breasts cut off, things like that. And these investigations, once the bodies were found, the investigations into the crimes were completely bungled. The chain of custody was not properly
Upheld.
carried out, yes. Basically, lines of inquiry that were very logical, like they should have questioned certain people. The way that they picked up the evidence, they mixed it up, things like that. It was just a very, very bungled investigation. Did not follow the standards of due diligence, of reasonable time.
In fact, it showed a complete lack of professionalism and interest.
But the problem there was that the police was involved.
But that's what we're saying, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Involved not as perpetrators. The police
was-
were not interested.
But they were proof that some police were involved.
No, not in that case.
No?
Not in the cotton field.
No,
We did
there was
not
actually
find.
no
We didn't
evidence.
find any involvement of the police. We found the police responsible for their lack of interest, their maltreatment of the family members when they came to make a report, and the fact that they were not doing their job.
So here the court said to Mexico, all right, the representatives brought to the court tons and tons of evidence provided by NGOs, of both local NGOs and international NGOs, by UN bodies, basically lots and lots of information to show that there was a grave situation of femicide in Ciudad Juarez.
In fact, I knew about it during my women's rights movements and attendance at the CEDAW committee. So I knew about that long before I went to the court.
So the court said, Mexico, you were well aware of what the risk was for women in Ciudad Juarez. So even before receiving these particular claims, you were in breach of your international obligations, perhaps not to respect the rights of women because they weren't actively killing women by state agents, but you weren't guaranteeing and ensuring the implementation of the rights to personal integrity and to life of the women in Ciudad Juarez. So already, even before you got the claims filed, you were already in breach of your international obligations. However, that doesn't automatically give rise to the duty to give reparations to a particular victim until you have a claim. Once there's a claim, given this context, and here's where the representatives did a really good job of showing the court that there was a context and a systematic pattern of killings of women. So here the court was able to use other cases to show, hey Mexico, in light of everything that was going on, you should have known that when you got those claims, you had a duty of strict due diligence to go find those women immediately because you knew that they were going to be in danger. So there, because they didn't immediately go out and search for these women, given that there was an imminent risk against them, and this imminent risk was obvious because of the context and all of the other cases that were in the knowledge of the authorities, Mexico should have immediately gone out to search for them. And then, so that was violation number one into the detriment of these particular victims. So here I just want to highlight, before the claims, there was a general failure to abide by its international obligations. But once there were claims, not only was there this failure, but also a duty to provide reparations to the particular victims of the case. Now, that was violation number one, not doing immediately everything you could to go find them. Violation number two was during the investigations, because the duty to guarantee rights not only is prevention, but also later investigate and sanction those responsible. If you don't investigate and sanction, then you allow these crimes to go in impunity, to stay in impunity, and impunity allows the repetition of these sorts of crimes. So violation number two was that you messed up this investigation. You should have done everything you could to find out who was responsible, and that was those were basically the two main.
In fact, it was Mexico, the state, was continuing the impunity because impunity had gone on for a number of years, because of their attitude or lack of.
So, in this case, what I want to ask is that in international human rights law, right, what you come to learn is that there are just two obligations. One is the vertical obligation, one is the horizontal obligation, right? So the state is also under the obligation to ensure that fellow citizens don't, curtail other citizens from exercising their rights. So to that extent, I will see why you have to always have a state agent responsible for the wrongdoing. Can you not hold the state responsible for not being able to protect the horizontal obligation?
That's exactly what happened in this case.
Yes, that's what we did.
There was no evidence to show that a state agent had killed these women. But the state didn't prevent their deaths because they didn't look for them immediately once they knew that they were in danger. So that was failure to guarantee rights.
Yeah.
And there was also a failure to investigate once they had already found them dead.
And the court also dealt with the general attitude in the community, in the town, towards women. A discriminatory attitude. as well. And in its reparation, it dealt with that specifically. That's one of the instances of what we call transformative reparation, to change the society. The court made an order as to what the states must do to change.
So Mexico is fulfilling its obligations to international treaties. Can that only be addressed once there's been claims? Or can you proactively call out a state when they're not fulfilling their? Or why? It seems like there's that happens very often.
Well, you mean within Mexico?
Yeah, within Mexico.
Well, remember in what had been going on in Ciudad Juarez had been going on for years because of the general attitude of machismo and the whole fabric within that state itself is where the city was suffered from this. So I think people had lost the ability to speak there. That's why they took it to the international arena. They complained to CEDAW. And I know, I attended lots of meetings at CEDAW when it came up. I signed petitions galore over it. And it was quite a time. CEDAW was doing its investigation and writing reports and so on. And it was a while before anything effective seemed to start, which is the situation where these petitioners found themselves, this family. And I'm sure more cases will go to the court from there, because if Mexico does not repair the harm that's been done to the others, because there are hundreds.
Sorry, if I could just add. Remember, when you're putting on claims for rights, there's different avenues that you can go to. If a state is in breach of its international obligations, and many different international bodies have said so, definitely civil society can point to that and use that internally to try to put political pressure and perhaps even in domestic litigation to prove their claims before domestic courts. Now, before an international tribunal, the tribunal,
whether you're common law or civil law country,
the international tribunal can only rule on the particular case before it. So it can only order reparations to address the specific claims before it. So even if, but here there's something that the Inter-American Court does that we're going to talk about later in the class on reparations. But in general, the court can't say, Mexico, you have to give reparations to all these other women that died. In fact, the petitioners wanted the court to give reparations to the families of the other women that were found in the cotton field. But the court said, no, I can't do that because you didn't bring this claim. It wasn't part of the original claim that was brought before us. So, but definitely the other family members of the other victims who were found in this cotton field can then bring a claim before the Inter-American Commission, and that case can eventually come before the court, and the court can order specific reparations for those family members.
Or they can apply in Mexico based on the decision of the cotton field case and say, well, that case has been decided this way in the international court. So why waste time going all that way and all the money that it will cost the state to go there? And in any event, Mexico has, as we mentioned yesterday, has decided that the judgments of the court are binding. So locally, they need not wait for the case to go through the Inter-American system anymore. The state itself can act based on that decision.
It depends a lot on what the legal system is in the particular state. I mean, Mexico has this constitutional reform that says every single judge has to apply the decisions of the Inter-American Court against Mexico and has to use other cases against other states as interpretive guides. So that gives the Inter-American Court's judgments lots of influence in Mexico. But then, of course, there are other states that their legal systems work perhaps differently. So you have to definitely sort of have in mind what your system is like before you take these decisions on your strategy for defending rights.
Just two questions in relation to the transformative reparations. Is that something unique to the Inter-American system? Because, for example, like the European system, you find that, and also like how do you
Can we hold hold that until we do reparations, because then we'll be moving out of discrimination and violence against women. And it's a very large area. The violence against women, especially, and discrimination, is so large and so alive today that we have to deal with it. We will be dealing specifically with reparations, and we'll go into that. And I'll hold you to your ratification, because you've upheld it by speaking today, okay? But you said 2 questions. What's the other one? It has to do with reparations too?
Yes.
So hold them for reparations, I bet you. Yes? Oh.
Okay, well, just to give you an example of, well, in this case, in the Mexican case, unfortunately, here, those women, it was shown by the representatives, because of all the information they brought from reports, international reports, and their own fact-finding. It was shown that these women were targeted because they were women. There was an actual violence targeted toward women because they were women. But remember, here there's also, when we're talking about discrimination, we may also find it when an act of a state or a law that is apparently neutral impacts women disproportionately. Now, what's an example of this? Well, unfortunately, obviously, I'm going to speak a lot about the inter-American system because it's the one that I know the best and I work in. But there was one case against Peru, the Castro case. This was a prison, the Castro prison in Peru. During the Peruvian, as you probably know, the Peruvian state has had a conflict with guerrilla forces and illegal armed groups such as Shining Path, and Tupac Amaru and others. And what the state had done was that it had taken people convicted, of acts of terrorism, and it had put them into this prison. Not just people that were convicted, but also people that had merely been accused and were awaiting trial for acts of terrorism. There was a women's pavilion and there were men's pavilions. And one day, the Peruvian state came in and basically started bombing the women's pavilion on the day before Mother's Day, on the visitation day for women. Started bombing the women's pavilion and shooting at the women, throwing tear gas and things like that at the pavilion. And well, here there's lots of things about this case that we could talk about, and I'll bring it up later on again because it has many different facets. And I'll probably bring it up again during this class. But one thing that I wanted to point out was that when the men saw that the women were being attacked, they started coming into the pavilion, and they also started to be attacked. So now we have both men and women being attacked. But there were several pregnant women in the pavilion. And during this attack, many of these pregnant women had to throw themselves on their stomachs and crawl to try to get to safety. Now, one of the things that the Inter-American Court said in this case, which was really the very first case, it was in 2006, the very first case in which the Inter-American Court did a very detailed analysis from a gender perspective. Remember, we're in 2013. 2006 was the first time that we had really gender perspective in the Inter-American Court.
Very sad. That's the only part I feel a little bit sensitive about. Very slow to get to the point.
So, but one of the things that the court said in this case, which like I said, I'll bring up because it has many different phases and facts that the court highlighted with a gender perspective. But one of the things that the court said was the fact that these women were pregnant, well, the fact that only women could get pregnant put them in a special condition. They had to crawl, I mean, when the men threw themselves on the floor to crawl to safety, they didn't have to deal with this extra
bump,
this extra worry, this extra anguish, that the women had to face, knowing that
it was a physical impediment
that they were crushing their children.
Yes.
So there, it's a case where women were impacted disproportionately because of their condition as women. It was a physical thing, a biological thing that impacted them in a different way because of their condition. So here the court obviously ruled a particular discrimination against the women in this case, and then gave particular reparations for that. But this was one case in which an act disproportionately impacted them because of that condition. And in many, I'm sure you guys can think of perhaps and many other cases in which a woman would be affected differently just because she's a woman. In healthcare, for instance, many healthcare institutions won't provide women with, insurance institutions won't provide women with coverage that they need because of their particular
feminine condition.
Feminine condition, yeah, or perhaps, well, no, I mean
gynecological
control. Yeah, things like that are not covered often in healthcare, and perhaps maybe you guys can point them out.
I think we should be...
1 minute. Oh, I thought he was first. Okay.
I just want to conclude that I think we should be careful somehow how we generalize, because this is law, this is a legal course. You see, we have had, at least I've known of an instance where a man has been pregnant before. It's not only women that get pregnant. The women are the ones that are most likely to be always pregnant, you know, or to give birth.
You mean somebody who changed their sex?
No, I don't know.
It was a male person who changed the sex.
Yes. A pregnant man.
No.
In the States, there was an issue of a pregnant man.
No. At the time, he had... It was a female. Yes. Yes. Changed. It was a sexual change.
Okay, well, we have to remember that...
Not fully at the time of pregnancy.
2 days ago, the case came up. I think they brought it on CNN. I watched it on CNN again.
No,
that the man wanted divorce from the wife. And I think he had a baby. The baby was grown now, about 3 years.
He's a he/she. Okay.
Well, I mean,
so, and then there's need for the use of sex when we want to, you know, refer particularly to women. Or if you're using
No, because sex also applies to the male. These are generic words, sex and gender. The fact is, if you are referring to women, you refer to women. Yes. If you're referring to men, you refer to men. If you're referring to gender, it's the social construct that has been imposed on both sexes.
No, Prof, you see, if you say sex-based violence against women, it's very clear. But if you just talk gender-based violence, it will not be too...
Of course,
but...
You study about that, we know that gender affects women.
But
gender is not only about women, but the fact is that women are always more affected.
The largest majority.
That's the fact. But it's not me saying it's statistics, it's around the world.
And remember, this course today certainly is on non-discrimination and violence against women. Women.
Here's the thing, even, honestly, that has to be some kind of situation, but even if it were the case that there was a man that could become pregnant.
But there wasn't. That's a red herring.
Even if it were the case, the law is about general principles, right? You can't cover every single situation when you write legislation or when you issue a judgment. But there is very hard evidence to show, and here it's very clear, that in many cases women are impacted disproportionately. That's not to say that men aren't also impacted, but if women are impacted disproportionately, then you have discrimination. And you can't tell me that disproportionately women are the ones that have the birth of childbearing. Have the burden of childbearing.
Physically and otherwise.
We have the burden
and
of
pain-wise. Physically and pain-wise.
Many men have emotionally, and we feel for our women when they're pregnant.
But do you think then that the court should have ruled differently because because of the possibility that maybe perhaps a man could eventually get pregnant?
No, you see, the emotional aspect will even be more difficult because you can't ascertain it. It could be more difficult and painful than the physical.
Let me give you a scenario. Supposing in the Castro and Castro case, you had the situation of these pregnant prisoners, detainees. Then you had their husbands within sight of them being maltreated. What then would be the position vis-a-vis the women themselves and the husbands in relation to any violation that you can envisage. Listen, the instance in the Castro case, their husbands didn't know what was going on at the time it was going on because they couldn't see them. Supposing they could see their wives being tortured, being beaten, being or attacked and dragging themselves in that way with their prospective child, and this is their wife in the first place, and they're expecting, if they could see them, what do you think of that kind of scenario?
To be a very serious emotional trauma for them.
And so what?
They cannot do anything.
And then what?
That's where we talk of oppression or discrimination based on gender. That's a powerful.
But would you say that it's psychological?
Yes, it is.
I want you to get to the end of the answer.
Take your argument, but make that into a legal argument.
Yes.
Into harassment.
Everything else, yes.
Put yourself in the position of the husband. What would you argue on your own behalf? You see your wife who's pregnant, who's been detained in a prison, being attacked in the kind of way that Julie described, and you want to file a case. What would you argue?
Discrimination, torture, inhuman.
Discrimination against whom?
Against the women.
No, I'm talking about you as a husband. As husband.
Mental harassment, trauma, my wife.
Remember the definitions that had gone.
Mental agony, mental trauma, I can take anything you want.
Here's a question. Do you think that in that situation, so there's a prison, the woman is on the floor crawling to safety on her belly.
Hopefully, to safety.
The man, her husband is watching. Do you think...
I'm not able to do anything to help.
Now, let's say both survive. Is there a difference in impact on the man than on the woman in that situation? Do you see any difference in the impact?
Yes.
What's the difference?
For the woman is the physical, and then for the man is mental, psychological, and emotional.
Well,
so I think that of the man is
both,
even more.
Probably.
That of the man would even be more because mental and emotional trauma, they're always more.
Well, I'm sure it would affect your machismo, not being able to help your wife, which is a great psychological impact on a male. Your ego will suffer greatly. So therefore, do you have a cause of action?
No, but it's not ego in this case. Like your wife and your kid, it's not ego. It's like your baby in there.
No.
Well, I'm trying to make it as difficult as possible.
What I'm trying to say is that this argument can go both ways, right? What about in a case in an armed revolution like that happened back home was that some of the people, what was done was that the male was dragged from the family, and like for example, the wife was made to watch him being killed. This reverses the situation and now see, because the gender can be for both the sexes.
Precisely.
Right? In this case, the woman only goes through emotional trauma. The man loses his life, goes through a lot of beating.
Exactly.
And emotional trauma.
Exactly.
So it's not about, I think it's not about one sex or the other sex, it's about what the situation is, and gender can play both ways.
Well, that is why I was referring him back to the definition.
And exactly in that case, there would be no discrimination claim because the woman was not impacted more greatly or disproportionately because she was a woman. Or you see what I'm saying? So exactly, there would be no discrimination claim there. You always have to keep what's the definition in mind. You have to keep, is there a greater impact on this group of people because of their condition? Because of their biological condition or because of their social, economic, and political condition. Anytime you're looking at a discrimination case, not just a discrimination against women case, we have in the court discrimination against homosexuals. So what do? You look at the category, and you look at the category of the group of people, and you ask yourself, do these laws that are apparently neutral, or do these acts that are apparently neutral, impact them disproportionately because of their situation, arbitrarily, because they're gay, or because they're women, or because whatever the category is? Or does it have an impact on them that perhaps is unintended or structural because of the way society works, that for some reason impacts them or harms them, causes them suffering to a greater extent than other categories? That is the essence of discrimination. And it works for all categories that have traditionally been discriminated against.
Yes, all groups.
Yes. Like this case was treated as discrimination, right? The Peru case.
Among other things.
It was, well,
there was torture, there was lots of things. But
there
yes,
were a number of violations.
I only told you one part of the story. It gets worse.
Because lots of cases that come before the court cover a large number of violations.
Or they're different phases, there was then what happened after the violence was over, and then they took the women to different centers. But we'll get to that.
An important question that was arised in Venezuela when the law to protect women started was only to put into the legal system men that attack women. But then we started to realize, people as me who used to work with that also sometimes women attack other women under gender basis. Okay? So it was, and cases started to get into the tribunal because it was like, an example can be a mother that can like, what is it?
Beat?
Can beat or really mistreat her daughter because she's sleeping with someone and is not supposed to a woman to do that. Or things like that started to rise cases. Or even in job situations, women that arrested other women under the story that they were female.
Oh yeah, I mean definitely women discriminate against women. There's no question. And in fact, actually,
and women attack men too, quite effectively too.
Well, and to add to that, men are discriminated in all sorts of sectors as well, especially the job sector.
Yes, but to go into the court, you have to prove that it was like gender-based. Like it's not only because I'm a woman and I hate you.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they're consistently hired just women, there's a man that you know and saying.
Yes. Yes.
I just want to reiterate again the importance of not like just taking things as independent of each other. We need to take into consideration intersectionality. I'm not just a woman, I have a race, I have a class, I have an education, I have a familial status, I have ethnicity, I have a sexual orientation, all of us have those things. So I think that we need to be really careful when we're speaking about this as well, that we need to consider intersectionality.
Go ahead.
We can, when it is in fact part of the case, but it's not always. Because the court also will have to reiterate this fact. We have to deal with the case that's before us. The court cannot go on a journey of its own out of the ambit of the case.
In our conversations we can.
Yes.
And the court there's cases where the court has dealt with intersectionality. For instance,
when it's relevant.
Two cases against Mexico also, where indigenous women were raped by members of the military. And in both these cases, and they were raped when the members of the military wanted to interrogate them, and when they didn't give the information that the military members wanted.
Thought they knew.
They raped them. And both these women had to walk miles and miles and miles and miles away to the nearest place where they could reach authorities to file a claim. And once they were there was no one that could speak their language to take their claim. So one of them had to give her claim by telling her story to her husband, and her husband translated into Spanish to the authority. And the other one had to get a friend to translate her story to the person. And both of these women had to repeat their story over and over again. And in their culture,
before anything was done.
And in their culture, many indigenous women, if they're raped, they're completely stigmatized. It brings dishonor to their family, even though they didn't do anything wrong. And so for them, it was re-victimization, the fact that the legal system didn't address, basically had double discrimination because, well, in that case, obviously state agents were involved, so they were directly using their sexual, well,
the one whose husband had to translate for her, that caused great problems in him and in their marriage.
So here, among the many things that the court said during this case was that Mexico had the duty to ensure that indigenous women had access to justice. So they had to be able to give their claims once in a safe place with a person of the gender of their choice in their own language. So someone had to be able to address the fact that they were in a situation of double vulnerability, not just vulnerable because of their sexuality, that the members of the military could rape them, but also vulnerable because they didn't have a way to get access to justice because of the language impediments. So definitely, and even in the cotton field case, the court did acknowledge that by and large, it was poor women who were the main victims of the femicide.
But there was also failure of proper access to health.
Those were Fernandez Ortega against Mexico and Rosendo Cantú against Mexico. Two different cases, but basically the same.
Because they suffered the same situation. No proper translation to speak to the medical people.
So well, those are two. I guess we could move on.
Yes, let's move on because time is.
Well, it's pretty clear that both discrimination and violence against women put women at greater risk of exploitation and have the effect of impairing or nullifying their human rights. All other rights in these conventions. I mean, non-discrimination is one of the rights that is consistently in all of the international treaties. But when this happens, when they're discriminated against, it has an impact on all of their other human rights. These two problems help to maintain women in subordinate roles in the family and society. They contribute to the low level of political participation by women and to their lower levels of education, skills, and work opportunities. UN Women has documented that globally, up to 6 out of every 10 women experience physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. That number's pretty huge. So what are the causes of discrimination and violence against women? Traditional practices, dowry payments and dowry killings, arranged marriages, polygamy, honor killings, genital mutilation.
Before you go into that, the previous one, the number that UN Women gave, about 6 out of 10 women experience physical or sexual violence in a lifetime. All right.
There are 14 of us here. So.
There is for such a high number, people often tend to belittle the effect on a woman of being sexually violated or physically abused, especially by her intimate partner or within the home or an agent of the state. And one of the things which the women's movement did find from collating experiences around the world is that it affects their productivity. Right. It affects what they put out in the workplace. So it therefore costs them and their families sometimes because they miss work, and their community because they do not contribute as much as possible, and it costs the country. It affects the economy of the country. Because when all the countries which have quantified the effect of violence against women, it's a horrendous figure of a country's annual budget, which is lost in that way. So it's a matter which is of some importance, and very often I have found that is the argument that moves politicians, the amount it costs the country. Right? And that is a tool which can be used if one is lobbying within the country.
I have a question. You were just saying that the ratio between 1 of 10 women have been sexually harassed and everything.
of 10.
It's an average.
Do you know the ratio, like how many men are harassed of not being manly enough in the society because of the patriarchal system? Even in the jokes, I think that they have a lot of social pressures that they have to act in a certain way to be a man.
I agree with you. I do agree with you. And maybe we can do a little session on the male. But this one we're concentrating on the women.
Because I think it's double-sided. Like,
It is.
Listen,
It has very serious effects. Very serious. In Jamaica, where I live, believe you me, you do not want to advertise the fact that you are homosexual, a male homosexual, because they kill them on the streets and the police will stand by. It's very dangerous for women in Jamaica. And they're trying to battle this. And the women's movement helped to do that.
I cannot discuss one issue because both of them are feeding each other.
I know, but unfortunately this course is...
It's just the oldest place around the world for these courses so I know they are related.
Yeah. But it's vis-a-vis women.
Because we don't have it outside.
Yeah. And I can't tell you that I don't know of the data, but I'm sure it's sizable, and especially in the South countries, I think it must be pretty sizable, and they would not keep the data on it.
I think women will never get.
Perhaps you could help us check on this overnight, and then we can see what we can squeeze in the discussion before the weekend. All right?
Yeah. Well, I think in line with what she's saying, I think with respect to discrimination, it should be gender-based. You know, it should be looked at a broader gender, not just on women. Because there are a lot of discrimination in the society.
Of course.
And so if the women can help us through this CEDA to push for all forms of gender discrimination,
CEDAW cannot.
Reach and the rest, I think we will...
CEDAW cannot, because CEDAW has to do with women. The name itself.
Because the number of violations is necessary allowed to protect women.
No, but women cannot. Women are our mothers. They are our mothers.
And yet you abuse us.
And they should.
And yet you abuse us
repeatedly. It will be difficult for us to abuse.
You love his wife, please don't say that.
Hand here, hand there. Yes.
I didn't ask you.
I think that everyone is raising very valid issues and concerns. I recognize the perspective you're bringing as this is a gender and human rights law class.
Gender vis-a-vis women.
Yes, I understand that. I do want to acknowledge the validity of the concerns of being as well. Even though this may not be the appropriate venue, I think it is important to give validity to what they're saying and recognize the
I do, yeah.
And maybe, you're saying through CEDAW we can use it as a platform, well maybe not in the sense that you're talking about, but maybe a framework for action for discrimination against men.
Gender-based discrimination.
Well, I could tell you where the agency where that properly fits into their jurisdiction, for want of a better word. That's the Human Rights Council, because that deals with the totality of human rights in relation to any kind of person that you could bring before them. And as an NGO can take it up, you could send a commentary or report on that.
Just to mention, remember at the beginning of the class I said, look at the CEDAW, which is from 79, and look at the Belém do Pará Convention, which is from 1994, 1995. In the Belém do Pará Convention, already, instead of using the word sex, it used the word gender. The movement for equality and non-discrimination recognizes that males can be discriminated against. But the fact is that today, by and large, in every sphere of society, women have the short end of the stick. So that's why here in the class we've been focusing on violence against women. That's not to say that there isn't violence against men, and not to say that there definitely is gender-based violence against men. There is, of course. We're just focusing right now on this part, but I mean, it's definitely valid, and the language of the international community has already changed in order to recognize that, and definitely the newer instruments have recognized that, and the soft law instruments that are coming out have recognized that, and in fact the LGBT community, which we'll get into in further classes, has used this non-discrimination language to assert their rights, for instance, homosexuals to have equal conjugal visits with their homosexual partners. And all of this, I mean, it's definitely, non-discrimination is definitely not just something that affects women. It can definitely affect men, and it does, and it should, and those rights should be reivindicated. However, today, in almost every single sphere of society that I can think of, I can't think of any exception, globally, and in general terms, which is the only thing that we can talk about right now because we don't have time to get into specifics, in general terms, women are abused and have systematically had their rights curtailed because of their economic status, because of their social status within society, because of religious practices. Oh, well, this is sort of getting into what the next part of this PowerPoint slide.
Okay, you just know the language that is used, and I'm really concerned about it. I don't know why the word discrimination is always used. I think it helps in constructing the roles of each one of them and makes it even harder. Why don't they say like fairly treated as humans? The term itself, I think it makes the issue more complicated, and it highlights the differences
my darling, if you know how much work goes into the use of words in UN instruments and regional instruments, sometimes you will spend 48 hours, all day, all night, 2 days running, discussing one word, whether it should go in that document. So the use of the word discrimination has gone through a whole heap of discussion, fighting, in political pressures, all sorts of things, in order for it to be in the documents. Are you the one from Egypt?
Yes.
I have a report here on the recent UN meeting in relation to violence against women and the rules of the, yes. And the, what is it called? The Islamic, conservative Muslim and Roman Catholic countries. And the Islamic Brotherhood, is that? Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They came out very strongly against the rules which were being promulgated, and said that the use of words and so on in these international instruments was deceptive by the non-conservative, for want of a better word, and it was to cover up free access to abortion, open access to abortion, and sort of do away with fundamental religious practices and beliefs, and therefore they cannot subscribe to them. They asked that they put within the instrument certain wordings that, yes, it's under the guise of sexual and reproductive rights. They want to change it and free up women to do all sorts of things sexually and about their bodies and make decisions about their bodies. And they were not in agreement with it. But anyway, in the end, the leader of the delegation, Egyptian delegation, voted in favor of the document. But it was a hard-fought battle, as recently as the 15th of March, just last month, at the UN. Every time a human rights instrument comes up, especially if within it there's anything to do with women's rights, violence against women, discrimination, non-discrimination against women, which have to be established, there is a battle against. You have to keep on fighting within the very arenas where the documents are promulgated. So it's alive and kicking. And the sexual orientation issue is also another red flag. Women's groups have always argued in all these arenas in favor of equality of treatment, whatever your sexual orientation is.
That's why I don't like the word discrimination.
And we keep on fighting for it. The fact is, nobody should be discriminated against for whatever reason. We shouldn't be. And I don't think using the word fairly, to be treated fairly, is sufficient. That is
not
too
necessarily
loose.
fairly, but I mean something that.
But
is the same meaning, but
what could be? I think discrimination is the best word for it. I really think.
Words, but like,
I really think it's the best word for it because I can't think of any other better word. Yes.
I think to use the word discrimination is to reflect a reality.
It's to reflect? To reflect what?
Yes, but I don't think that really a word will change that. I think it's other things, more.
And one of the things you do not want to do is to go to the UN or to the OAS, and say, let us. The word discrimination is used in the Belém do Pará or CEDAW and so on. We think it ought to be changed. If you do that, you're opening the floodgates for them to cut down on the rights, which have already been established, because they're always looking for a way to cut it down. Always. The conservative group.
And it will never be, everything
Always.
will never be, there will always be a claim about a word, about it will always be something. You know that the Catholic Church, like before the Pope resigned, 1 month ago, he was complaining about the use of the word gender. There will always be someone complaining about something if it's related to women and homosexual and transsexual people. There will always be a complaint. He was saying that the natural order of a family is completely opposite to the meaning of gender. So because biologically, women were supposed to raise children and have a family and be there for the man. So there will be a claim, there will always be something.
But I wouldn't even go to argue what my church is arguing. Sometimes I'm quite embarrassed as to what comes out of the mouths of my church in relation to women and our rights and our situation as women. So I tend not to go there, because if I go there, I probably excommunicated. But that is arrant nonsense. I'm sorry. I am not bound by his statements that he makes in those regards. He himself is unnatural. Why didn't he get married and raise a family? Please, let's not go there.
I don't know how many people have sex.
No, he had his hand up, please.
We're almost done.
Yeah.
When we're talking about discrimination and gender put together, like the way I see the discussion is that, first of all, for anyone to take a claim of discrimination as a legal category, I think by and large the rule will be treat like cases alike and different cases differently. It comes with a understanding that you treat everybody equal unless you...
But the motive is
I'm just you prove everyone, you treat everyone equally unless there is a category of people that can prove that they have a different standing.
Yes.
It can be based on their physique, it can be based on anything.
Quite.
So as soon as you are able to prove that you are a different category, that to whom the normal rule must not apply. You have a right claim to discrimination. The special privilege, you cannot be discriminatory as against others. So in that sense, when you look at the bigger picture and put together the issue of gender and discrimination, what I see is that just as women are targeted all around the world, right? I think even LGBT community, if you look at it, even the treatment is as bad, if not worse off. So instead of trying to see it in binary as to whether it's male or female, what we should try to look at it is what are the special categories that can be and how can we claim additional protection which will not be discriminatory all the way to the favor of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the court has actually used that same logic
Right.
in order to protect LGBT rights. The Inter-American
Which
Court.
we will do.
Yeah, I'll just explain on the category. The Article 1.1 of the American Convention does not mention sexual orientation as a protected category. It does mention sex and gender, but not sexual orientation. But it does say, or any other social category. And the court said, okay, this is another social category, but what social categories count as protected categories? And one of the things it looked at was the historical treatment of lesbian and gay persons in Chile. It was a Chilean case at the time, and a historical treatment of these persons. So one of the things you have to look at is repeated instances of treatment of a particular group of people because they are belonging to that group or because they are affected because of whatever conditions they are in disproportionately. Remember, it's not just a distinction, it's a distinction that is based on the fact that they belong to that group or because their group is impacted disproportionately. And yes, sometimes men will be the discriminated category. It's possible, yes, definitely. That's
not only possible.
I mean, it happens. Yes, no, it definitely happens.
Yeah.
And in that case, the discriminated category was gay persons, LGBT. And yes, it can work for any category. If in one country, for some reason, they decided to ban all blonde people, I don't know, then maybe blonde people could be a discriminated and protected category. And when you have a protected category, the burden is then upon the state to show that any difference in treatment or any difference in the law is not due to that belonging in that group or doesn't impact that group disproportionately. And so there's a burden shifting. That's why we call them protected categories. You have to show that your acts don't harm that group disproportionately, or you have to show that your acts aren't aimed at that group because they belong to, or to those persons because they belong to that group.
Or you could also show that because they are so vulnerable, they require a certain amount of
special treatment.
It can go both ways.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, yes, the duty may be to refrain from doing something, or it may be to proactively do something to bring those people up to par with everybody else in a particular treatment or category, or benefit, or human right, or whatever it is that we're talking about.
That's what SIDA is all about.
Balance.
I know that we have to give you a break soon. If I could just finish these 3 slides, because we're about to... Basically, it's just the causes of discrimination and violence against women. One of them are traditional practices. We're going to talk more about these when we come back from the break. So I'll just read them to you right now. Dowry payments, arranged marriages, dowry killings, polygamy, honor killings, genital mutilation are all examples. This should say economic and power relations and stereotype expectations of role in society. These could be based on religious beliefs, but don't necessarily have to be. The idea that women are subordinate to men or that they belong to men as property. Dependence on men for protection or economic welfare. This dependence may be based on society's view of who should have primary duties in the home or for child rearing, for instance. Or the idea that they belong in the private or domestic sphere and they should be excluded from public life, such as in the Gonzalez case. Prejudices regarding women's nature or her competence, the idea that she's not as smart as a man or that she doesn't think rationally. That she's very emotional, she's weak, or that the woman is very promiscuous, so you have to reduce her libido to preserve purity, and that's why we get genital mutilation. Ideas of morality and honor. For instance, in Morocco, one woman was forced to marry her rapist in order to protect the honor of the family. And other ideas based on morality and sexuality. When we get back, we're going to talk about the different types of violence that exist against women in the different spheres of society, starting from the family unit or the interpersonal unit. So if you guys could think about things that you've identified in your own countries that you see as discriminatory.
Yes, you are going to be more proactive on that part of it. You are going to come and tell us what happens in your country, which fits within the various categories.
I think it's really important to talk about religion.
Yeah, well, that'll be one of the
it's one of the categories. So it's left with you what you choose to talk about from your own country. So 15. said yesterday that we have to keep on and on. It's not a closed book. It's an open-ended book. Once we are human beings, we will be faced with these problems. Once there are human beings in this world. Perhaps if we change our characteristic and become lizards or something because we've ruined the environment, things may be different. But we're stuck with what we are, the two-legged creatures. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah. When you're talking about certain aspects of violence against women and what has the state done, because international obligation...
No, give us something about your country.
No, exactly what I'm trying to say. I'm going to that.
Oh.
I think so, especially in the issues of issues that contain violence against women and gender issues. I think so at a level that they are so deep that it does not matter what really aspect the state has been doing. I'll give you an example of dowry death from India. If you look at the most prevalence of dowry death is in India. The most strictest law in the world on dowry death is in India. Now because as per the law, if a couple are married and if a woman dies by any reason within 7 years, and if it is not clearly due to a reason, let's say for example a disease or something, there is a natural presumption of death on the husband, and the burden of proof is shifted on the husband and his family to disprove that she didn't die because of the guy. So the law is in fact the strictest law in the world, and you see this in the force through their penal code. But why don't you see this in practice is because of years and years of patriarchy, and when you see that the law has come to understand the unfortunate space given to women and their plight, and has tried to enforce it with the strictest law. But why haven't things changed is because of education and awareness at the local level. So in a way, state can brush up his hands saying that as per the international standards of violence against women, we've made our sort of protection, we've given them the highest amount of tools to go for. But if you don't change the attitude of the people, things such as which are so deeply entrenched in patriarchy will not change.
But that's one of the reasons why the CEDAW committee has said repeatedly in dealing with country reports from various states, it is insufficient for you to come and tell me in your report, I have this law on this, and this law on that, and that law on the other, and wow, haven't I done well? We want to know what is the situation on the ground in relation to de facto realities when it comes to women and their daily lives. And what are they facing? What problems they're facing? And how they're being dealt with. So it's not enough to just come and laud the thing about you have certain laws. CEDAW has made that quite clear.
I get that, but what I'm trying to say is that the problem is a little deeper, because it's not like the country is only trying to bring about laws and wash off his hands.
Oh no.
There was a realization, because in terms of, if you look at the jurisprudence that has evolved in dowry deaths, it's one of the most complicated aspects of Indian criminal law. It is, because you presume, like imagine you get married and like the wife dies within 2-3 years. The onus is shifted on you, which is departure from criminal law. So if you look at it, the state has all the bona fide intentions of bringing about a good law and trying to see this change. But despite the state's actual effort, it may not be happening because of education.
So do you think that the state could possibly implement sensitivity campaigns or re-education campaigns?
Public information.
I think more of those things also are necessary, but don't you see that these things actually take some amount of time, especially with this. So what I'm trying to say is that a state might have bona fide intention in bringing about laws and may not limit itself just to be a formal avenue, but may not be able to bring about a change immediately.
But what's it doing? You have the law, you have a good law, but it's not dealing really effectively with the problem. So what should the state do in those circumstances?
I have a question.
And the state includes all the agencies within the state.
Is the law not being implemented, or is the law being implemented and yet they continue?
You see, the nature of law is not preventive. Because generally this nature of law is not preventive. I think the way that they're missing out probably is not going for the prevention of dowry death, rather than having a law that operates on post-incident for the rights of the victims. That would be one possible avenue, because what I see is that awareness is lacking.
What about doing away with dowry completely?
Sorry?
What about doing away with dowry completely?
Ever since the Britishers have left, I think there has been a constant effort to do away with dowry. It is criminal. It is not legal. It is criminal. There's a Dowry Prohibition Act.
It's a major offense. As he said, he says that Indian Constitution provides a special privileges to women. As he said that, he's rightly said that the issues, right now one of the famous issues going on in India about the rape cases in India. A lot of women are raped in India. But there's one of the arguments saying about the NGOs and National Commission of Women, there should be a capital punishment who commit a rape. But you need to understand.
I don't believe in capital punishment.
Exactly. You need to understand the mentality of the people. You should change the way of thinking.
Precisely. If that's what you have to work on.
If somebody commit the crime,
and you have to use every means.
Eventually die.
Every means.
There is another way because it's the mentality of the man. It has to be changed.
Yeah.
It's not
the punishment.
It's not a punishment
to others.
Yeah, it's
sometimes punishment is not an effective tool to change. The only person who maybe suffers the punishment and may change, may not, is the actual person who is punished, not the general society. And you need to change the mindset.
That's why
the mindset of people.
They say, give them capital punishment. Come on, you need to understand the mentality, not the punishment. Punishment is not a way to change the reform.
But this is what basically I think we all accept de facto conduct, cultural practices which have been in place and instilled in people's lives and minds, and which they're born into, is the most difficult to change. But that takes a hell of a long time. But that doesn't mean a state can say, wow, I have the laws, but what can I do? You have to use every means possible to change the mindset of people. You have to. You do things on TV, things on radio, newspaper adverts, whatever, public sessions, private sessions, everything you use, do skits, plays, all sorts of things you have to do. Right? That's what the CEDAW committee wants to hear. That's kind of.
I wanted to comment something about that. That is true that even if we have the laws, without education, we do anything, you know? Like in the case of Venezuela, they did the most beautiful law in the world. It's like perfect on paper. But when you're really working with that, as I did, it doesn't function. It doesn't function because people sometimes, women came and they domestic violence, okay? So they say, okay, I want to denounce and everything, and then they retract the denounce because they are afraid, because they are not safe, because the laws say that they are supposed to have the name in Spanish is Casa de Abrigo. It's like houses to be protected after
shelters.
Yes,
Yeah.
the guy, yes, because many women are beaten or violated in their own houses, don't have money or resources to live. This is one of the causes because they stay, no? So then they have no secure places where to go.
Well,
and that is also a cultural factor. Another cultural factor is that when they come to their families, the women, and say to their mothers like, okay, my husband is beating me or something, the mother says it's the way it has to be.
Go back,
so it's
yes.
culture. It's culture, and even with the law has been really good, and the number of domestic violence has decreased a lot. But still, the culture is a big impediment.
Let me ask you a question. Why does the law provide that when there's domestic violence, it's so bad that the woman's safety is in serious jeopardy? Why should she have to leave? Does it provide that the man be put out?
Yes, but usually the law says that. But usually in severe cases, the woman escapes because she's in a big risk. So when she escapes, she doesn't have a place to go.
But supposing she doesn't escape, she applies to the court. In certain jurisdictions, I know this is it, you apply to the court because your husband has beaten you to a pulp last night and is going to beat you again tomorrow. So you go to the court in the morning, by afternoon the order is made, and the police go with the order and take the man and put the man out.
What happened is, that's really good. What happened is
that's
that what you say is really good, because this is one of the main problems. when that happened, usually the police doesn't have mechanisms to secure that the man is not coming back. So what happened is that the process is like, okay, the police came. All the neighbors will see the man coming out of your house. You're so happy, I'm here. And he comes back the next day or any other day.
And nothing happens to him?
And the police say, oh, we doesn't have enough police to follow every case. We doesn't have money to do that. We doesn't have the resources.
But see, this is really good because here you have a clear solution that you can demand of your government.
Precisely.
You can say, in this case, what is required to protect these women's human rights is adequate training and adequate resourcing and adequate funding for the police unit that is in charge of these types of cases.
And it's happening a lot that after announced, the government received 2 or 3 days after a severe threat or even being killed or something because the guy come back.
But because they know that when they go back, nothing happens to them. But in the jurisdictions I'm telling you about, they are arrested immediately if they do that.
But you can do that in Venezuela because the prisons are overcrowded and they released 2,000 people last year because there's no place. Minors offense.
That's wrong. Excuse me, Prof. We have said that at times, most times, punishment is not just the solution. But how we look at, a man may not be insane to be beating a wife every time. Have you looked at the other issue? What is the cause? Why is this man always beating the wife?
Because he probably was beaten when he was a young child, and the cycle of violence continues.
Possibly, maybe the wife is always running her mouth in a way that
So because she runs her mouth, he beats her physically?
Okay, no, you see, there are a lot of issues. Let me give you an example, Prof. You see, this man may come in late, from somewhere, maybe from social
where he should not have been.
From social outing.
Where he should not have been.
But he has the right to interact socially.
Yes, but
maybe from work. No, we're looking at reality here. In business.
My dear, I practice law. No. I know what happens.
No, I'll give you an example now. I'm looking at real life situations. Like in busy cities like where I live in Lagos, you see because of traffic, at times when the men close, even about 5, 6:30.
It takes 5 hours.
Yeah, so because of that, some men want to go to the club and cool off to allow the traffic to, to wait off. And it takes some 1 or 2 bottles and the rest. And maybe the woman has a grievance and is waiting for the man with that grievance. You have not checked the mental state of the man. You just come in and you're passing on.
Let me interpose one question for you. This man loves his wife and respects her. Yes. So why doesn't he phone her to say where he is and when he expects to be home? Telephone to say, listen, the traffic is so bad I've decided to stop and have a couple of beers. If you respect your partner, you will do that. Yeah, let's not go there. Let's not go there. Because you cannot, there is nowhere in the world where it should be accepted that because a woman runs her mouth at her husband for actual grievance or perceived grievance, that the man should then beat her.
Good, but the mental state of the man at that particular time should be
I don't care about his mental state, he has to control himself.
And that could have led him to doing that.
Drunkenness is no defense. Drunkenness is no defense.
So they should also look at the woman. Please, if this man is always drinking social time, try to talk to him.
Listen, when a case on domestic violence is heard, when it's the inter partes hearing, the man has a right to say his piece, and then the judge decides, like any other case, who he believes. I hope you don't treat your wife in that way.
It's your fault, wait.
You had your hand up.
I'm just trying to clarify what I'm hearing.
I know. We're talking.
I really did clear. So the argument you're making is that in the case of domestic violence, altered state of mind due to substances, such as alcohol, needs to be taken into consideration legally when looking at domestic violence. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you should look at, you should balance the case. You look at both sides of the coin, you know. And the woman should be encouraged, you know, to also look at the state of the man. Before the man may not be a wife beater naturally, you know. And okay, in some places, like I said, this is a normal thing every day. The man has to come back late because of traffic. So it's not every day he may drink. So this particular day he takes some break and the rest, maybe because, you know, he just feels like taking some drink, and he goes back home and the wife is already waiting, you know.
So the wife, in this situation, I'm just trying to understand completely.
Yes.
As the wife, I've been home all day with the children, cooking, cleaning, while the husband has been out at work working so hard. And I've been doing nothing but working in the house, which is not as valuable as working as outside the house. I'm just like the devil's advocate.
Okay.
So I need to understand that when my poor husband, who's been out drinking because he wants to avoid traffic, whereas I haven't had a choice to avoid the things I've had. And when he comes home and he's drunk, I should let him.
You may have some drink at home. You have the choice. You may have some drink at home. But then you trigger the violence. You trigger the violence. You see the man stepping, and his step is not like the usual step you are used to. He just steps and staggers a bit, and you are coming in with that kind. You know, you should know that this man is not in a good state. Oh, at that time we need some. You know, men can be like babies as well. At that time you need some care. Oh, honey, sorry, I come back. You should be sensitive that something may be wrong here. And you know, reserve your case until when the man looks better.
Is the most disrespectful thing I have?
Let's do the tango. You must understand.
Wait, let her talk.
In that situation, then, seeing someone drunk, I should understand that because they're drunk, I should let them be drunk.
No, boil your fire at that time. I don't want you to be sober, so that both of you can be on the same state of reasoning.
I'm always drunk and I have ever been nowhere.
So if I know that.
So you know me.
That's how you know that.
And in that situation, I'm trying to understand. In that situation, I'm at fault for engaging in a discussion, whereas the male would not be in fault for hitting me. Is that what you're saying?
No. You will be at fault for hitting you, but then you are also at fault for not considering the state. You were not in the same kind of mental state.
Being can I tell you something? I totally agree that sometimes when you drink or whatever, some people they get more aggressive, but drinking is a personal responsibility. If you're getting aggressive, don't drink. It's a personal responsibility. Yes, it's your choice. You cannot blame me because I have aggravated. If you cannot handle your behavior and control it, so don't drink.
Look at what triggered it. The man may not have the intention of being aggressive or resulting.
It's not a matter of that.
The trigger.
The matter is he took a decision and got himself into a state where he was not able to control himself. Secondly, he would have broken the law driving home in that state. Yes.
First of all, just on the point, the only thing that I have is, in terms of, like, legally speaking also, like, when you talk about voluntary intoxication, it cannot be a defense.
It's not, I said that. I said that at the beginning. At the beginning, I said, it's not a defense. Drunkenness is not a defense anywhere.
No, but we're looking at, it's not just punishment, legal punishment. We're in a conflict situation. We also look at triggers and look at how we can resolve this thing permanently. What more between families?
We're getting away.
Off this.
The point is, what does the state have to do to protect women, given that it is the case that in every sphere of society, in every society across the world, women have been subjected to violence? So what does the state have to do? You're suggesting that in law, the state should implement law. Do you think that what you're suggesting, it will better protect women from...
As part of education, they will encourage, the state as part of education will encourage women, you know,
so you think the ones that should be educated are the women?
What about encouraging the man to treat his partner with respect?
So
if you're going to be late and you're drinking somewhere, call your wife and tell her. That is respect between spouses.
So you think a better option is
She
educating.
has a crystal ball.
You think it's better to educate the victim rather than educate the person who is perpetrating the violence?
Both. So that there will be no triggers and no violence. You look at it.
In any event, in my experience, a wife beater does not suddenly appear and beats his wife only once.
It's the same
They
thing
don't.
if you are in the job having with
Once is too much. But generally they have a history.
Okay, let me tell you something. It's the same thing if you're in a bar or a club or anything and a random guy was wasted and he had a terrible day, so he just decided that he's gonna take off all his anger on you and started beating you when you just trying him, but he was wasted and
No, trigger. Look at the trigger. That's what I'm saying. Look at what trigger is. The man will not just go and...
No. I think we have extended and stretched this to smithereens. Let's move on. You want to speak on this or something else? Something else.
Can I?
On this? But very shortly because we have stuff to finish. Yeah.
Really quick, I want to recapitulate some things that we've identified. What are the duties of the state? Pass adequate legislation, but not just that, implement it effectively. 2, change cultural attitudes that lead to rights for women through education, through awareness campaigns. 3, provide adequate human and financial resources to authorities tasked with the protection of women. 4, provide training to authorities tasked with the protection of women. I didn't finish. But we can continue to identify.
Yeah, let them speak. They haven't spoken and then you. But shortly, please.
Regarding the education, I believe, well, considering the huge discussion we just had, I think it's like, well, in Costa Rica they are starting implementing some policies or some programs that is like how men can find a new masculinity. So it's like how, like sometimes being a woman, that's accepted by society. So the man feels, oh, I have the right to do it because he has seen it in a lot of ways. He had talked with his friends or whatever. So the man, it's like culturally, he knows that he has the right to beat his wife, and most of the times he will get impunity. So in this kind of education, yeah, it's like stop doing this, but how? How you can re-educate the population? How can you like implement a new cultural like perspective? It's like not only if you want the women to empower themselves, yes, that's a great choice, but you need to empower also all their environment. It's like you cannot empower women without empowering men. It's part of it.
Or you disempower.
Yeah.
Yes. Let him finish quickly.
For example, in Lebanon, you don't have like really good laws for violence against women. So, for example, divorce cases go to the respective churches of the mosques people belong to.
So that's religious.
Yeah. So in the case of domestic violence, a woman, for example, whose husband is beating her, goes to a political party and complains. So the party calls. I don't. This is the Armenian case. I don't know about it. So the husband. The party calls the husband and talks like what's going on. He wants him not to do it. So it happens immediately. The party sends like 2-3 guys and beats them up and beat them out. Yeah.
Can you repeat the last one? What happened?
He said,
the wife complains to the party that my husband is beating. So the party calls the husband saying what's going on and wants him not to do it again. So it happens repeatedly. The party beats the husband.
A legal solution. That's what I'm trying to bring. I want to always be a legal solution.
Nobody said it had to be a legal solution all the time. Nobody said that.
Saying that it has to be much more than a legal solution.
There was a case where the husband was a gambler, drinker. Like it happened. Like they went like bloody nose all over like the house. Like he was like a carpet in the house.
But there are a lot of issues.
Please. Yes, yeah.
I have a question about the duties of the state. Which state are you talking about? A utopian
All
state?
states.
A utopian ideal state? Which state can follow all what you have written? They have a lot of burdens besides of this. How can they fulfill it?
They have to find a way. That's it.
And how will
They have to find a way.
How
Listen, once they have signed on to the treaty is a contract. When you sign a contract to do something with someone personally, you're bound by that contract, right? If you fail to meet your obligation under the contract, consequences flow for which you will be responsible. It's the same thing when a state signs one of these treaties. It's a contract.
It's a contract, but when they do not fulfill the promises of the contract, what happens? Nothing happens. The international community, there is no end.
What happens is what the contract itself says will happen.
But it never, what happens?
What happens is when listen, you should try really to attend one of the committee hearings when your state is reporting to that committee. Then you would see the embarrassment that they go through. And that does have some effect. Sometimes when they go back, they change the circumstance when they return home because they're so embarrassed. They don't want to go there the next time and face that kind of thing again. It does work sometimes. And this is the best tool we have. We're human beings. Well, this is what has been worked out so far, right? The international community, through our representatives, that's what has been worked out. It's the best tool we have. We cannot rub our hands and say, well, the state has so much to do, so therefore,
as
nothing.
the example Samantha gave about the most beautiful law in Venezuela that they have done, what I was just asking her was the state so ignorant and stupid that they don't know that there is no enforcement mechanism to ensure that the husband is not going back? No, they know, but they just want to keep the situation as it is. It's politics, it's a lot of things.
It's a lot of things, yes, we all know that. But you cannot just say, I can trust the state. The state has lots of things to attend to, and so therefore what can the state do? They must, as you said earlier, the citizens have a duty too.
So it's not
The citizens are part of the state.
I have to
when we talk about
between state and citizens. It's totally
subject and object.
Yes.
For me, they are totally different, and what the state does is different from what the citizens does.
There will not be a state in existence if there are no citizens.
Okay, maybe my understanding is the government. The state is the government. This is my
No,
understanding.
that's the executive.
Yeah, state is only state. Not
The government is the executive, is part of the state. A state is a conglomerate. Yeah? So you don't think of the state only as the government. That's just the executive arm of the state.
I think.
But I think that what Rin brings up, and I think it's important because it's the reality, which is that there's a separation, which you've been talking about, between a good law,
of course,
people making those laws, the lawyers who are involved in making those laws, and organizations on the ground who really can make change and implement those laws. So the only way